the sharp clink of metal striking hardwood sliced through the quiet dining room like a warning shot. Margaret Hale stared in disbelief as the antique brass compass, her late father's most cherished keepsake, slipped from Chloe's hand and shattered on the polished floor. Tiny shards of glass scattered across the patterned rug, catching the light from the chandelier above like broken stars. Chloe curled her lip as if she'd just dropped a piece of trash. Beside her, her mother, Vivian, let out a high, mocking laugh that echoed far louder than the room deserved. Outside the tall windows, rain hammered against the glass, smearing the view of the city lights beyond. Inside, warm candlelight, the scent of roasted duck, and soft jazz did nothing to soften the tension now crackling in the air. 20 guests sat frozen along the elegant mahogany table. Crystal glasses, silver candelabras, and imported roses framed the scene, but all eyes were on the shattered compass. And in the middle of that heavy silence, Chloe shrugged and said, "Margaret, really? This old, rusty thing? For Ethan? On New Year's Eve? We expected something meaningful, property, stocks, at least a luxury watch. But this?" Margaret turned her gaze to her son, Ethan. He sat beside Chloe, shoulders slumped, eyes glued to the untouched plate in front of him. His fork trembled slightly in his hand, but he didn't speak. Not a single word. He didn't defend her. He didn't defend the compass. He didn't even defend himself. Vivian leaned forward, her gold bracelets clinking together. "Oh, Margaret, don't look so offended," she said with a fake sweet smile. "Chloe is only being honest. You have wealth, real wealth, so why act like a miser? A grown man deserves a real gift, not scrap metal wrapped in sentiment." The room fell painfully silent, the kind of silence that pressed against Margaret's chest and made the walls seem closer. For 3 years she had endured their comments, their entitlement, their delicate insults hidden behind smiles. But something shifted in her that moment. Something deep and old, something that belonged to her father and the years she spent fighting beside him. Uncle Robert suddenly stood from his seat at the far end of the table, face flushed. "That compass saved Samuel Hale's life," he snapped. "Show some respect," but Chloe waved dismissively without even glancing at him. "Please, Robert. This is a family matter. Stay out of discussions beyond your pay grade." The insult landed hard. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Others stared into their wine glasses, unsure where to look. Margaret rose slowly, her movements controlled and calm. She walked around the table toward the broken compass, every step measured. Her knees ached, but she ignored it. She crouched down and gathered the pieces gently, like something sacred, and wrapped them in her linen napkin. She placed the bundle into the pocket of her blazer and straightened up, her face unreadable. Then she reached into her other pocket and pulled out her phone. The air tightened. Even Chloe's smirk faltered slightly. Margaret dialed the first number. "Good evening, Mr. Grant," she said evenly. "Yes, I apologize for calling during the holiday. I need an immediate repossession, the silver Range Rover Sport, license 9KT, W27. A gasp rippled through the table. "Yes, tonight. Please tow it off the property. I have the spare key." Chloe's jaw dropped. "What?" Margaret ignored her. She dialed a second number. "Mr. Whitman, activate the contingency protocol for the family trust. Remove Ethan Hale from all corporate accounts, effective immediately, and revoke his clearance at the dockyard." Ethan's head jerked up. Terror washed across his face. "Mom?" Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. Margaret didn't respond. She dialed the third number. "Priority banking services, yes. This is Margaret Hale. Cancel the 2 platinum cards assigned to Ethan Hale and Chloe Martin." Chloe stood up, so fast her chair screeched. No, what are you doing? You can't do that." "Margaret, stop." Ethan pushed his palm against his forehead. "Mom, please." "She didn't mean it." She stressed. "We've had a long—" Margaret cut him off with a glare sharp enough to slice glass. "You had 45 seconds, Ethan," she said quietly. 45 seconds while your wife insulted your grandfather's memory and insulted me, and you sat there doing nothing." Vivian cleared her throat, suddenly uneasy. "Margaret, darling, this isn't necessary. We're family. It's New Year's Eve. Let's not be dramatic." Margaret turned her gaze toward her. "You," she said, "are guests who have overstayed your welcome by 3 years." She walked to Attorney Collins, who had been sitting silently beside Uncle Robert, his expression grave. She rested her hand on his shoulder. "Collins, bring the new estate documents tomorrow morning. I'm rewriting my will." The color drained from Chloe's face. Her wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, the second object destroyed that night. Vivian stared at Margaret in horror, clearly unprepared for consequences. Margaret, however, felt strangely calm. Cold clarity, like the still silence before a storm, had settled over her. Before anyone could speak again, flashing lights swept across the windows. A tow truck. The butler stepped quietly into the room. "Ma'am, the driver is here for the Range Rover." Chloe spun toward the window.
"No."
"You can't take that. My phone is inside, my equipment, everything." She whirled on Ethan. "Do something." "She can't do this. Stop her." Ethan didn't move. He didn't even lift his head. "It's not your car, Chloe," he said, voice hollow. "It never was." Something in Chloe snapped. "You coward," she screamed. 3 years I pretended to care about you. Pretended you were interesting. Pretended this family mattered. And now you sit there like a spineless child." Every guest froze. Even Vivian looked alarmed. Ethan lifted his head slowly. Heartbreak etched across his face. "Pretended," he whispered. "Oh, please," Chloe spat. "You think I married you for your charming personality? Without your mother's money, you're nothing. Absolutely nothing." Margaret exhaled, steady and controlled.
"Get out," she said.
Her voice wasn't loud, but the authority in it sent chills through the room. "Both of you, leave my house." Vivian jumped to her feet. "We have nowhere to go." Margaret arched an eyebrow. "The Hilton is down the road. Surely your consulting fee can cover a night or two." Vivian blanched. "What fee?" Attorney Collins lifted a thick folder. "The $300,000 payment to your shell company," he said calmly. "Listed as strategic lifestyle consulting. We have the full record." Vivian sputtered. Chloe lunged for the folder, but Uncle Robert blocked her path. "Enough," he growled. Chloe and Vivian had no choice but to leave. They stormed out, yelling, slamming doors, cursing. Ethan did not follow them. When the guests finally filtered out, some apologizing quietly, others too stunned to speak, only Ethan remained, slumped in his chair like a man drained of all strength. Margaret stayed standing, watching him, her heart aching despite everything. After a long silence, Ethan rose slowly. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour earlier. "Mom," he began. Margaret held up a hand.
"No."
"I don't want excuses. You showed me who you are tonight." Ethan's voice broke. "I swear, I didn't know about the shell company. But the spending—"
"I knew it was bad, Mom."
I wanted her to love me. She loved the lifestyle." Margaret said softly. "Not you." She took a slow breath. "The trust is frozen. You're on your own now. If you want a roof over your head, you work for it. If you want food, you earn it. I won't fund your destruction anymore." Ethan nodded weakly.
He didn't argue.
He walked out into the rain, refusing the umbrella a staff member offered. Margaret watched him until he disappeared down the long driveway, drenched and shivering. She touched the wrapped compass in her pocket and whispered to herself, "Sometimes you let the ship sink so the sailor learns to swim." Little did she know, the next 6 months would change everything. Chloe's downfall arrived swiftly and publicly. With no credit cards, no access to Ethan's accounts, and no luxury car to flaunt, her online persona crumbled. She posted a dramatic video accusing Margaret of financial abuse, but Attorney Collins released a simple statement confirming improper spending, without mentioning names. Internet investigators did the rest. Sponsorships evaporated. Invitations dried up. Without her curated lifestyle, Chloe became invisible to the very people she tried to impress. She and Vivian moved into a small, aging apartment on the outskirts of town. Gone were the spa trips, the designer clothes, the endless stream of packages delivered to the estate. According to a mutual acquaintance, Vivian left for Arizona shortly afterward, leaving Chloe behind with overdue rent notices and a dying social media account. Chloe eventually took a job as a hostess at a mid-level restaurant. A photo circulated online, Chloe wiping down menus, hair tied back, face pale with exhaustion. No filters, no ring lights, no glamour. Meanwhile, Ethan faced reality far more quietly and far more painfully. Ethan spent weeks crashing on a friend's couch, applying for corporate jobs he assumed he'd easily get. But without Margaret's recommendation, and with rumors of his termination spreading through the industry, doors slammed in his face. Frustrated and humbled, he finally walked into the dockworkers' union hall. He didn't say his last name. He signed up simply as Ethan. He was hired as a lumper, the lowest position, the one that involved hauling cargo by hand in the cold with no special treatment. Work began before dawn. Rain, snow, heat, none of it stopped operations. On his first day, he vomited from exhaustion before lunch. On his second, he nearly quit. But something inside him refused to. He returned day after day. Over time, he lost the softness of privilege and gained calluses, muscle, grit. Big Mike, the foreman, called Margaret one afternoon. "He's struggling, Miss Hale. But he hasn't quit yet. Not once." Margaret swallowed hard. "Treat him like everyone else," she said. "If he's late, fire him." But he wasn't late. Not once. Ethan rented a small studio apartment with peeling paint and noisy pipes. He bought a 10-year-old sedan that stalled twice a week. He cooked cheap meals, sometimes burning them, sometimes getting it right. He washed his uniforms by hand because he couldn't afford to run the old shared laundry machines too often. He saw parts of life he had never experienced, life without safety nets or guaranteed comfort. Months passed. He didn't call Margaret, and she didn't call him. Not out of anger, but because growth often happens in silence. Then, one quiet afternoon in June, the anniversary of Captain Samuel Hale's passing, Margaret drove to the cemetery with a bouquet of white lilies. As she knelt to arrange them, she heard slow, hesitant footsteps behind her. She turned. Ethan stood there in worn work boots, jeans stained with oil, and a flannel shirt patched at the elbow. His face was tired, but his eyes were finally clear. "I brought you something," Ethan said softly. He reached into his pocket and held out a small box. Margaret opened it slowly. Inside lay the compass. Restored.
Polished.
The brass gleamed as if new. The glass face was uncracked. The needle pointed true north again. "How?" she whispered. "I spent my first 3 paychecks getting it fixed," he said. "Found a craftsman in Portland who restores antiques. He worked on it for weeks." Margaret's eyes glistened. "Why?" Ethan swallowed. "Because I lost my way, Mom. I lost everything Dad and Grandpa taught me. I let someone else steer my life. And I hurt you." He looked at Captain Samuel's headstone. "I let them insult him, and I didn't stand up for him. Or for you." Margaret wiped a tear from her cheek. "How's the job?" "Hard," he admitted, but a faint smile tugged at his lips. "My back hurts every morning. My apartment smells like mold. But I pay for everything myself. For the first time, Mom, I feel like a man." Margaret nodded slowly, studying him. The posture, the humility, the worn hands of someone who finally understood effort. "And Chloe?" she asked. Ethan sighed. "We finalized the divorce last week. Her lawyer tried to request alimony until the judge saw her spending records compared to my dockworker wages." He let out a humorless laugh. "She actually came to see me afterward. Said she wanted to start over. Said we could rebuild." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her I was already rebuilding," Ethan said quietly. "Just not with her." Margaret closed the compass box and placed it gently in her purse. She stepped close and hugged her son tightly. The smell of sweat and machine oil on his clothes reminded her of her father, of honest labor, honest effort, honest life. "Come home for dinner on Sunday," she said. "I'll make pot roast." Ethan smiled. I'll bring the wine. But it'll be the $15 bottle from the grocery store. Perfect, she whispered. Ethan didn't return to corporate life immediately. He stayed at the docks for 2 more years, working his way up from lumper to shift manager. He learned how to operate heavy equipment, how to resolve conflicts between dock workers, how to read cargo logs without relying on software. The men respected him, not because he was a Hale, but because he could carry the same load they could. Margaret visited occasionally, sometimes bringing lunch, sometimes simply watching from afar, a mother proud but cautious, giving her son space to grow. And he did grow. The work carved new strength into him, reshaped him. There were days he came home exhausted, but fulfilled. Days he earned praise from supervisors who had no idea who his mother was. Days he failed. Days he triumphed.
All
of it mattered. When he eventually accepted a position at the corporate office again, he walked in not as an entitled heir, but as someone who understood the company from the ground up. He brought discipline, compassion, accountability,
change.
Margaret, too, found herself changing. After rewriting her will, restructuring the trust, and cutting unnecessary influence from her life, she felt lighter, like a ship shedding old cargo. She returned to the shipyard more often, walking through the docks with quiet pride, remembering her early years there with Jonathan. She hosted community dinners, started a scholarship for maritime engineering students, reconnected with old friends she had neglected while trying to appease Vivian and Chloe. Her home became peaceful again, filled with soft music, family recipes, and the warm crackle of the fireplace during Seattle's cold nights. The compass remained in her study, displayed in a glass case. Not because it needed to be protected, but because it had become a symbol, not of loss, not of betrayal, but of clarity, of choosing dignity over comfort,
Truth over peace.
and courage over silence. Ethan began visiting Margaret every Sunday. Sometimes they cooked together. Sometimes they talked for hours about nothing and everything. Sometimes they sat silently, sharing the comfortable quiet that had been missing from their relationship for years. One evening, as they finished dinner, Ethan said, "I'm thinking of mentoring the new guys at the yard." Margaret looked up, impressed.
Why?
"Because I wouldn't have survived my first 3 months without people looking out for me," he said. "And I want to pay that forward." Margaret smiled. "Your grandfather would be proud." Ethan hesitated, then asked, "Mom, do you ever regret what you did that night?" Margaret put down her glass. "Every decision comes with pain," she said. "But regret?
No.
I chose the truth. And the truth saved you." Ethan nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "It did," he whispered. "It saved me." 6 months later, Ethan was promoted again, this time to operations coordinator, overseeing several teams. The men who used to tease him for being soft now joked with him as equals. When new workers arrived complaining about the cold or the workload, Ethan told them, "First week is hell. Second week is better. Third week, you forget you ever wanted to quit." At home, Margaret noticed Ethan's confidence returning, but in a quieter, more grounded way. No more designer suits. No more expensive watches. He wore simple clothes, practical shoes, and kept his apartment modest. He no longer wished for the extravagant life Chloe once pushed him into. He wanted stability,
Purpose.
authenticity. Word spread quietly about Chloe's situation, too. She bounced between jobs, unable to hold one for long. Her online presence disappeared entirely. She sent Ethan an email apologizing for everything. He replied with a single line, "I hope you find peace, but our paths are different now." Meanwhile, Vivian resurfaced only to request money from Chloe, who no longer had any to give. The mother-daughter relationship fractured, and they drifted apart, each blaming the other for their downfall. Margaret didn't celebrate their suffering, but she did acknowledge something essential. Consequences matter. Choices matter. And some storms are self-made. On a crisp autumn morning, Margaret received a call from Mr. Whitman. "There's a board decision to be made," he said. "We'd like Ethan to represent the operations team." Margaret's breath caught slightly. "Is he ready?" More than ready, Whitman replied. He's earned the respect of every crew leader. He's firm but fair. And he understands the company's foundation better than anyone his age. When Margaret told Ethan, he shook his head in disbelief. Me? On the board? Why not you? Margaret asked gently. You've done the work. All of it. Ethan looked out the window. The same docks he once walked in shame, now a place of pride. Yeah, he murmured. I guess I have. The board meeting went better than anyone expected. Ethan spoke confidently, offering solutions drawn directly from his years on the ground, not from textbooks or executive memos. The older members listened. Really listened. When the meeting ended, several shook his hand warmly. One said, "Your father would be proud." Ethan blinked back unexpected tears. Margaret waited outside the conference room with 2 cups of coffee. How'd it go? She asked. Ethan took a long breath. I think I found my place, Mom. Good, she said with a smile. A place built by you, not handed to you. As winter approached again, Margaret prepared for the holidays with a lighter heart. She invited close friends, her employees, and Ethan's coworkers, people who genuinely cared, not those who sought luxury or influence. Ethan arrived early to help set the table. As he placed the silverware, he paused and looked at the compass displayed on the shelf. Mom, he said quietly, can I borrow it? Margaret turned. For what? For my son, he said simply. I want him to grow up understanding direction, not just in travel but in life. I want him to know where true north is. Margaret's eyes softened. Of course. That evening, Ethan sat with his little boy, Liam, on the living room rug. He opened the compass case and let the child study the smooth brass, the glinting glass, the quivering needle. See this? Ethan said gently. This helped your great-grandfather find his way when the sea was rough. And it helped me find my way when life got messy. Liam looked up with wide eyes. Does it still work? Perfectly, Ethan replied. But only if you respect it. Only if you listen to it. Liam nodded solemnly and held the compass to his chest. Margaret watched from across the room, her heart swelling. Later that night, after the guests left and the house grew quiet, Ethan stepped onto the balcony where Margaret stood drinking tea. The city lights reflected off the wet streets below, reminding them both of the night everything fell apart and everything began again. Mom, Ethan said softly, thank you for not giving up on me. Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder. I never gave up. I just stepped back so you could walk. Ethan swallowed hard. You stepped back, but you never let me drown. Margaret chuckled gently. No mother worth her salt lets her child drown. But she does allow him to feel the waves. As midnight approached, Margaret found herself reflecting on the past year, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the silence, the rebuilding. She thought of the moment the compass shattered and how symbolic it had felt. Now, standing beside her son, she realized the truth. Sometimes things break, so they can be rebuilt stronger. Sometimes love requires distance. Sometimes dignity requires fire. She turned to Ethan. Do you regret that night? He shook his head. It saved my life. She nodded. And it saved mine too. The clock struck midnight. Fireworks burst over the skyline, their reflections sparkling across the windows. Ethan reached for Liam and lifted him into his arms as the boy squealed with delight. Margaret leaned against the balcony railing, the cold air brushing her cheeks, the warmth of her family behind her. This was peace. Not the quiet, suffocating peace she once maintained for the sake of appearances, but real peace. Earned peace. Built on truth, boundaries, and love that had been molded by hardship. She closed her eyes and let the sound of laughter fill her. It was the first New Year's Eve in years that didn't feel heavy. Looking back, Margaret understood something she wished she had known sooner. You are the captain of your own ship. You choose who sails with you. You choose when to anchor, when to change direction, and when to cast someone overboard for the sake of your survival. Life will always bring storms, people who drain you, disrespect you, or try to steer your ship for their benefit. But dignity is worth more than any wealth. And true north, your values, your strength, your courage, will always guide you home if you dare to follow it. She touched the compass on the mantel one last time, whispering a quiet thank you to the man who taught her how to navigate. Then she turned toward her family, toward the warmth waiting inside, and stepped forward, steady, confident, and finally free. Thanks for watching. If you value stories of respect, dignity, and justice, please subscribe. It means more than you know, and it lets me keep sharing the lessons life has carved